All right, so I think we can get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Clow and I'm the Quarantine and Rules Coordinator with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. So today I'm going to be joined by Tim Elliott, who works with motor fuel quality and enforcement with the Weights and Measures program, as well as Gloria Robinson, who's the agency rules coordinator. So today is meeting one for the electric vehicle supply equipment rule. So we're going to be discussing the multiple payment option requirement that's outlined in Second Substitute Senate Bill 5192. Next slide. So just to go over the quick meeting controls, we went over these last time, but just kind of as a refresher. So this meeting is being recorded. So because of that, we ask that you please mute yourself and keep yourself muted throughout the meeting unless you're speaking. If you do speak, make sure to unmute yourself, and you just do that by clicking that little microphone icon. If you're on the phone, you would press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Feel free to ask questions throughout the meeting. We're going to be going over a lot of different topics. So if you have any comments or questions, just feel free to ask as we go. If you're on your computer, you can raise your hand and we'll kind of be watching to see if hands are going up or not. You just press that little hand icon, or you can leave a message in the chat. We'll also be monitoring the chat. If you're on the phone, there's not really a way for you to signal that you have a question or a comment, so feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. Next slide.
All right, so basically this is just the type of information we're looking for. It's the same stuff we sent out to you on the email request and input. So what we're looking for is what are we trying to achieve out of these rules? And we need that information. That way we can actually make rules that achieve those goals and not just tell you how to do something. We want these rules to work as best as possible. But one thing to keep in mind is it needs to be within the scope of the statute. I have received some input requesting stuff that either goes against the statute or goes past what the statute is. We don't have authority to do that. And some of that I might bring up some of the comments just because it is good input, I think, especially for industry to kind of hear some of the stuff. But I just want everyone to remember that we are regulated by whatever the statute has required us to do, and we really can't go anything past the authority that's given to us by that statute. So not only are we trying to look at how to achieve it, but these rules came to us. So a lot of the stuff we don't know exactly how to do it. So we need your input, especially if you've dealt with California or just and other stuff. Just let us know if you have an idea on how to achieve those objectives, even if it's like model language or something we could use.
Hey, Tim, quick question there. Thanks, Michael Crowdhammer here. You mentioned that folks have filed comments. We at the Alliance for Transportation Electrification did file comments. We submitted them to you and Amy. Is it possible, or do you plan to be posting comments to the website, comments that you received, so that everyone can see what comes in?
Possibly. We haven't really discussed that. We'll have to see, because it's not really official comments. I don't see why I necessarily couldn't do that. But I know it's not, because it's not like comments on the rules. This is kind of input that's coming in. But I'm assuming we probably could potentially post that stuff so people could read through it. And if someone has an issue with that, let us know so we could discuss it. But it is it's a public agency, so that information is public still.
Right. I think that would be very helpful. So thank you very much for considering it.
Okay. Yeah, and then the other thing is we need to know how it affects you and kind of anything along that. And then the last thing is data. One thing I haven't really received much is any type of data. If you could especially provide model, kind of, even if it's not an actual specific device, but if you have any numbers kind of along the lines of this is what it costs us to put these in and to operate these, and these are what we charge. I mean, one of the things I would love to actually see that I haven't really gotten very good information on is just the charging sessions. Like, here's an example of a DC charging session and a level 2 charging session of what, what an average cost is on those. Just, it's good information for us to have as we're trying to help go through all this and determine how this affects everyone. All right, next slide. All right, so the requirements, we have to have the rules established and in effect by January 1st, 2023. So that's when they're adopted. They won't necessarily go into effect until 2024, but this is when they have to be established, and we have to be done with everything, including our economic impact study. So to adopt the rules requiring all EVSPs make available multiple payment methods at the publicly available level 2 or DC fast charger EVSEs installed in Washington. And then we may also review them and amend those rules every 2 years. And we also have to try to maintain consistency with evolving technologies, which is going to be a very, very challenging thing for this, because this is a very fast evolving field right now. And then the other thing you have to keep in mind later on in the section is we have this requirement of, in adopting the rules required under the subsection, which is 1, the department must seek to minimize costs and maximize the benefits to the public. So those two don't always go together, so it's something we have to find that balance on. All right, next. Okay, so the first section we're going to kind of discuss, and I understand that deadlines, a lot of this may get adjusted more once we actually come up with the rules, because it's going to be dependent on what technology needs to be developed and what's available and all that stuff. But we have 2 sets of deadlines. We have deadlines, so deadlines for compliance for level 2 and also DC fast chargers if they're installed prior to a specific date. And then we'll have deadlines for compliance for level 2 and DC fast chargers installed on or after a specific date. So if it's installed like the first A and B, those will be, if it's, there'll probably be a second date of when they have to become in compliance, or if they just never come into compliance, that's something we have to determine. And then we could also have different deadlines between level 2 and DC fast chargers if needed. All right, next slide. So that's kind of what this is going after. So should level 2 and DC fast chargers have the same deadline date? The installed cutoff, I have had recommendations of 2023, 2024, and 2025. And a compliance date for those already installed to basically have a 10-year grace period. The other thing is we also need to determine is identification of installed date to qualify. As a regulator, when we have to inspect those, we need to be able to determine when they were installed, if they qualify for that grace period or not. If we can't determine that easily, it's going to be basically have to go with the current requirement. We can't be going back and looking at paperwork. A lot of times inspectors can't access our system even in the field, and that's even if the system shows it, which likely won't. So that's one thing we'll have, and there's a requirement on that for other grace periods is in the statute, is you basically have to identify it easily for the inspector to determine on site when it was installed, so they know if it's going to meet that requirement. And before we get into the discussion on this, is as a regulator, I'll be up front. 2024 looks good because that's what's already in statute on other stuff with a 10-year grace period. That's kind of why we have that in there. But definitely need input from everyone and discussion on these different topics. Looks like we have a comment. Charlie, what happens to the existing chargers installed before the rules are implemented that may not meet the criteria that is unknown now? So basically what will happen is if it's installed already before the rules, and say if 2024 deadline's decided on, with a 10-year grace period. Just use that as an example. Basically, any of the chargers that are installed before 2024 won't be required to meet whatever requirements that we come up with. They can continue operating as is until the 2034 time period. At that point, they either need to be updated or need to be removed. And these deadlines would be just for this section for basically the multiple payments. Other sections have different deadlines. So
I think Annabelle had a question.
all right, Annabelle.
Hi, thanks. Annabelle Drayton with the Northwest Energy Coalition. Thanks, Tim. On the second bullet point, so installed date cutoff, I know you referenced a 2024 kind of deadline that exists in the bill already. You know, that's specific to Section 9 and the weights and measures kind of specific components. In that section, it specifically references like the titles within Handbook 44 and 130. So we see that as really specific to the weights and measures component of the bill, and that it doesn't apply to the kind of other sections of the bill, which really require a January 1, 2023 deadline. Given that 2023 is already, you know, still a year and a half away, we think that that is plenty, that's adequate time to plan for kind of new installs. And so we feel 2023 would be more appropriate for kind of that initial deadline.
Okay. Yeah, one thing to do consider though is right now it's a year and a half out, but by the time the rules are actually go into effect, like after we adopt them, it could be much closer to 2023. And if it's less than, especially like 6 months, that may, at that time, it may to give a service provider 6 months to potentially add something could be a little extreme. Especially if, depending on how extensive the requirements are. If the requirements are very basic, then it may not be that hard. But if the requirements are very extensive and that needs technology, that may not be available even until then. So that's one thing we have to kind of figure out, and why the deadlines right now probably won't have a good idea exactly when we could set that deadline until we actually know what the requirements that we're going to be requiring are and actually get input on what it's going to take to meet those requirements. Right, Nolani?
Hi, this is Nolani Derrickson with Tesla. Agree, Tim, with your last comment. In order to allow the industry adequate time to revise payment standards and systems and build necessary equipment, we think that the compliance deadlines for new EV charging stations should be required at least 12 months following the final adoption date. So, for example, if the regulations are finalized and adopted by January 1, 2023, which is what was outlined in the bill, then the compliance deadline for those new EV charging stations, we think, should be set a year after that, so 12 months, January 1, 2024. And from our perspective, we think that these deadlines should be identical for public level 2 and DC fast charging stations for simplicity's sake. And on the existing EV charging stations, we agree with the 10-year grace period or 10-year phase-in for compliance. We think that's appropriate given potential retrofit costs. The 10-year phase-in date for existing equipment is also already established as precedent in the bill, Section 9, as Annabelle flagged. So we think staying close to that is appropriate.
All right, thank you. Justin?
Hey, thanks, Tim. Justin Wilson from ChargePoint. I think my comments largely at this point would echo Noelani's. I would, on the time span between when regulations are finalized and when compliance should happen, I do think that, you know, we would, again, generally agreeing, but would reserve kind of a final input on that, because it is dependent on, you know, what any minimum requirements might look like, you know, and is that software, is it hardware, how extensive that is. I would note that, we've certainly seen projects, take from 12 to 18 months to be completed, and often, depending on the project, procurement of the charging stations can be very early in that project development timeframe. And so I think somewhere, between 12 and 18 months, can make a lot of sense, just kind of thinking through the different types of entities that are installing charging stations and the processes they have to go through in order to get from concept, procurement, permitting, and installation can vary quite a bit. And then tend to agree on the compliance date for EVSE already installed, 10 years from when the first initial compliance deadline for new installs would be. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And Glorian actually reminded me, and I don't even know why I didn't think about this earlier, is even though the rules are adopted by January 2023, they actually can't go into effect till January 2024 anyways. So I guess in some kind of way for the new compliance, you could do 2023, but it'd be probably not even legal that way anyways. So I think 2024 would likely be the earliest that we could actually use as the first date. And then also the Holly or Cam made a comment, utilities purchasing equipment for installation often have a complex process of procurement that takes many months, and then there is a delivery time expanded due to a chip shortage, and then construction schedules can take many months. All right, we go with Nolani, and then after her, Jay.
Oh, apologies. I forgot to take my hand down. I'll take it down now.
Jay, you can go ahead and go.
Sure. Hi, this is Jay Friedland from Plug in America. I just wanted to echo what Annabelle said and indicate, it sounds like through the rulemaking process, there are some limitations and requirements, but I would encourage the state of Washington to follow or sort of harmonize, maybe is probably the best word, as closely as possible with the California regulations where you can, because basically California is kind of driving the fact that the EVSPs and EVSEs will have to be upgraded to a particular level. And so it seems like there is a reasonable possibility for harmonization, which is an advantage to the industry because that way you don't have multiple standards. And it's also an advantage to consumers because basically you can get the compliance faster. And I would encourage actually two things in terms of looking at the grace period. I think I think there actually is some bifurcation between level 2 and DC fast. There was a fair amount of work done on this again in California. Because the nature of DC fast is much more of a, it's closer to the gas station model. And the sooner that we can get consumers being able to use the broadest possible kind of access, the better off we are, and the more we can meet everything from equity goals to just access to electricity at a basic level for EV drivers and consumers. So I think that that's very important. So I would recommend actually that DC fast chargers be upgraded more quickly, and actually, a requirement for more quick upgrade on that if possible. And then make sure that the DC fast charger deadline date is as soon as possible because this is about, serving the public. And that's really, really important. And so the sooner the public gets access, the better off the state of Washington is. Thanks.
All right, thank you. John?
Yeah, good morning. This is John Rothland with Avista. And I just want to point out the possibility of setting separate compliance dates for the DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers was was a deliberate provision in the bill to consider that, the DC fast charger models are a little more settled upon, where the level 2 models, there's the market is still sort of sorting out what those look like and what consumer preference is. So I'd like the department to give consideration to a delayed compliance requirement on the level 2 as we sort out the technologies and consumer preference and, aligning the model types and requirements for the level 2 chargers.
All right, thank you. Francisca?
Hey, this is Francesca Wall with Tesla. Thanks for the opportunity to provide some quick feedback. I know Noelani already kind of articulated some of our points that we wanted to make in this context, but I heard California come up, and I will just say that, there was a lot of stakeholders active in those discussions, and it was somewhat hotly debated in terms of what the final requirements were there. And, part of the discussion was around a technology review sometime within the early years of the adoption of the requirements, which haven't gone into effect yet. So I would caution somewhat against sort of just strategically saying we should align ourselves with what California is doing. And I also think that business models may be evolving and changing, and options to make payment access easily facilitated to consumers are also evolving. So I think there are some factors just to keep in mind when looking to what California has done and how that implicates how the technology is evolving. And then I would just say on the timelines aspect, I think, it really depends on what ends up being required in order to make sure that there is sufficient time to integrate that into products. I do think folks are trying to design products and don't want a patchwork of regulatory policy across the country or even globally. But I think the reality is that technology is moving more quickly than regulation potentially. And so there is some need to allow for a time to at least incorporate any modifications into products. But happy to share more on the thinking around the California experience at any point in time, but just wanted to provide that high level feedback at this point.
All right, thank you. I go to a comment from Michael from Commerce. 2 questions. How is Teams chat being incorporated into the formal record, and how does it align with WA public record requirements? Glorianne, can you answer that?
Yeah. First, Michael, can you clarify, are you talking about this Teams chat in this meeting here?
Yes. Yeah, I know. Hi, everyone. This is Michael Breach with Washington State Department of Commerce. I know there's, I believe it's from OFM, there's requirements around chat retention, but that's from Commerce's own agency rules. I think it's just a week, but that's not for rulemaking. So I'm just curious about how, from a rulemaking perspective, which is subject to a lot more state requirements, how the chat is being incorporated. And if I've asked like 3 questions in the chat, and I'm happy not to do that if Ag would prefer that any formal discussions or questions be said verbally or in our written form outside chat.
No, it's fine. My understanding with this meeting chat is that it should be able to be saved so that it can become part of the official rulemaking file. I believe, yeah, just any other, conversational chats that agency might have, in amongst itself. They do have a much shorter retention period. I think ours, is either a week or I think we might even be 2 weeks. I can't remember exactly. But for purpose of this rulemaking and making sure that we're capturing all of the information that we're getting, we'll definitely be making sure that this chat here in this meeting is retained so that we can refer back to it, and so that we can show how the rulemaking came along in the process, and the information that people are sharing and the questions that people are asking are really important pieces of that.
All right, second question is ag considering any incentives to encourage earlier transition before the 10-year requirement of existing infrastructure. Perhaps fees could be waived or reduced based off an early adoption timeline. We haven't really talked about that. Off the top of my head, I would say probably not. It is fee for service program. So if we were to reduce fees or waive the fee, that means we'd have to put that burden on the rest of the chargers that are out there. And legally, I don't know if we actually can do that. But I mean, something we could always look into, but unless there's some other type of, I think money would have to come from some other way to basically pay for their part of their fee. It wouldn't be us reducing the fee on our end because it's just not how a fee for service program works.
Tim, I have a question back for Michael on that one. Michael, Department of Commerce, I know at times can come into some grant money that they can divvy out to folks in different businesses or industries. Are you aware of Commerce having any grant money that could be used as incentives?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's possible, and I actually our EBSC fearless leader Tonya Buell's on the line, and I think I would be curious to hear how she's considering for the West Coast Electric Highway monies for updates, but for existing infrastructure. But from a commerce perspective, it's certainly possible. Right now, the way we're viewing our program, and for folks who don't know, Commerce runs an infrastructure program called the Electrification of Transportation Systems, which we say ETS for short. We are looking at gap elimination. So we want to encourage new installation rather than existing, though that, again, it's not out of the question to consider right now. Something that's going to come out of House Bill 1287 is an assessment of infrastructure need across the state. And so I haven't done the math recently, but if we're talking about infrastructure in the state growing at least an order of magnitude in the next 10 years, and Tim, to your comment about, I certainly understand the legal requirement of it's a fee for service, but if I think we should be doing the math about what a rough estimate of what infrastructure will be installed in the state, and then I'm sure this will happen in the fee rulemaking part or the fee section of this rulemaking. But to figure out what those the money streams to ag will be, and in terms of, I know someone else, I think it was the gentleman from Plug in America talking about, weighing the public good, is if in 2028, if the existing infrastructure is a really small slice of the overall infrastructure pie, given just the scale that's going to be installed, would there be an impact to the service rendered by ag, and would the public stand to benefit dramatically from existing infrastructure being transitioned earlier? Those are rhetorical questions. I think we should address them later, but that's just where my mind is going, is that, ideally we would avoid a punitive model if we need existing infrastructure to transition. As Gloria asked, is there a way to incentivize this either from a reduced compliance fee or if an agency decides to fund that? I also would say I'm curious to hear if Tonya is comfortable answering Gloria's question about funding existing infrastructure retrofits.
Oh, hi, Michael and Timothy and all the participants. This is Tonya Buell. Thank you, Michael, for putting me on the spot. As far as the zero emission vehicle infrastructure program grants, for this next round, we are offering the potential to install new DC fast chargers or upgrade existing fast chargers, DC fast chargers that have Chatham only chargers, some of the very old legacy chargers, and it's a competitive grant program, so it's up to the grant applicants to show the need for updating the chargers and and installing new chargers in locations. So there is funding that is available for both new and upgrades to existing charging infrastructure. And the third component, of course, is for hydrogen fuel cell refueling. So it's a competitive grant program, and it can definitely be used for upgrading some of the early West Coast Electric Highway charging stations that were installed in 2012 that at the time were on the cutting edge, and now they're becoming obsolete. And they're in some great locations and need to get installed. We can't just award funding directly for that, but the new owners of the equipment in Washington and Oregon can definitely apply and compete for those funds. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great information. Thank you both. And we'll be wanting to touch base with you later for more information about that, because it is something that we can actually mention in our small business economic impact statement as something that's available to the industry to help make these changes. So we'll touch base with you later on that.
All right, Annabelle.
Thanks, and thanks everyone. That was a great set of information. Again, Annabelle Drayton with the Northwest Energy Coalition. I just wanted to also weigh in about the kind of 10-year grace period, and one component that's in California that I think would be really helpful for Washington to strongly consider is the provision that the requirements would then apply if there was a major retrofit at the EVSE. And so I think that's something that should be included in Washington's rule, and you can look to Section 9's definition of retrofitted and use that as a starting place as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was looking back at the actual statute to see if it even mentioned in that section. But yeah, that would definitely something we'll take in consideration and probably add in there is if it is significantly updated, that it'd have to follow the new updates. The other thing is I also kind of would expect that as this stuff moves along, that a lot of the service providers would be probably updating anyways, because if that's where the customers are going, they're gonna follow the customers, and if it's restricting what they're doing and what the sales they can do, it's gonna be in their best interest, especially if they're updating the new updated equipment will apply automatically, just include that. So, okay, Matthew.
Hi, this is Matt Nelson with Electrify America. Just a couple important points I wanted to make on the schedule. The first is that you note here the install date is the date that you're working from, and we think that's a really important thing to maintain, that you're using the install date. There are frequently situations where especially DC fast charging equipment is installed, and then we as charging providers become dependent on the schedule of the utility, and in some cases it can be many months where the utility does not interconnect a DC fast charger that's been installed to the grid, and so its in-service date can be months after the equipment is installed. But of course, once you've purchased and installed the equipment, it's very hard for that equipment to meet new standards while it's waiting for an interconnect. So we appreciate you focusing on the install date as opposed to the service date. I want to reiterate a point that was made earlier, that the development schedule for a DC fast charging station is currently 18 months to as much as 2 years, and the equipment is ordered before the end of, or before the project development begins. So equipment that is installed was ordered usually more than 2 years previous, and so it is very difficult to make any changes to equipment that in less than, say, 12 months, or really, in our experience, less than 24 months. The last thing I would point to is that as you consider your options here, the more creative you are in the regulatory requirements, the more requirements that you consider that may be new to the industry and require changes, the more time industry will need to adapt. So if you're considering a universe of requirements that is very familiar to the industry, then we will need less time to adapt. But if you're requiring things that no one else has required before, and it will require redesigning equipment, then that will, by definition, will require more time for industry to adjust. So our advice and our encouragement would be to be pretty consistent with not get too creative in your requirements, as the more new requirements are imposed, the more difficult it will be for industry to adapt. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on to the next section? All right, next slide.
Oh, I just put my hand up. Sorry, Tim. This is Andrew
sorry.
with UTC. Sorry, Andrew Rector, Utilities and Transportation Commission. So I take the comment that Matt Nelson just mentioned about, being careful about requiring a bunch of new things simply because they might have a little bit greater lead time. And it made me just kind of wonder if part of this question of when should the deadlines be might end up being answered by, well, what are the actual requirements going to be? I mean, the bill or the law obviously has some pretty clear direction that it thinks that we should probably be going in. But yeah, I kind of think that maybe the deadline question ends up getting a little bit mixed in with the actual requirements that we're asking companies to adhere to. All of that being said, I would definitely be interested in learning a bit more about kind of lead times for technology and construction of stations and things like that. When I hear a 10-year grace period, my initial reaction is just that seems like an awfully long time. And maybe we can do things quicker than that. I don't know exactly what quicker is, but yeah, that's, I guess, just kind of my initial reaction to it. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, go to the next slide, please. All right, the minimum requirement payment for payment methods. It must be convenient and reasonably support access for all current and future users of the EVSEs. Payment methods may include, but not limited to. So there is some flexibility that was kind of put in there by statute to provide flexibility as things change and technology and just the way people buy stuff changes. So we have credit card reader. The device can be located on the device itself or in a kiosk that serves those devices on site. Contactless reader devices may be used. A toll-free number for each equipment or at the kiosk. And then a mobile payment option. And then section 4 kind of defines that. For the purpose of this section, mobile payment means an electronic fund transfer initiated through a mobile phone or device. Go to the next slide. So some of the things to kind of discuss is, should all three of these be required, or to allow an option, include interoperability as the option? That's one thing I think we need to kind of also consider when we're looking at this, is interoperability is a payment method to some extent. And then should we have any differences between level 2 versus DC fast chargers? And ensuring all required methods work on a regular basis. And don't fail unreasonably. Heard some complaints about screens not working or other issues when they get to the devices, of them not be able to actually work there and having to call the 1-800 number to actually get anything to happen. And then any ideas on avoiding requirements that may become obsolete. And then the cost of these payment options, this is more of just a comment on our end. So compliance with other parts of the statute is, we do have the low to moderate income, unbanked, underbanked part that also does tie into this. And then the compliant dates will be different for current and future equipment. So part of that is heard a lot of complaints about, well, retrofitting credit card readers onto devices is costly. There would be potentially a 10-year, grace period or whatever that period's decided on, that we'd also have to kind of consider too. So if it is adding equipment, it's not necessarily retrofitting, it'd be the new equipment coming in. And then after that grace period, it'd either have to be retrofitted or just replaced. So just some of the things to consider as we discuss this. Any questions or comments on?
So, Tim, did you have a specific set of questions in the last time you paused? You kind of had a teed up like 3 or 4 specific questions, or you just kind of open-ended?
Yeah, this is a lot larger section, so these are it's a lot larger set of specific questions. Annabelle?
Thanks, Tim. Just to jump in, the Northwest Energy Coalition provided comments, and I think our positions outlined in those comments. So we have no objection to those comments being posted on AG's website, or however you feel is appropriate to distribute those public comments. But I think we feel that all 3 of the requirements should be included, at least as they're recommendations in statute, but we feel that they're a good place to start. They align with California, and they provide a reasonable amount of flexibility while appearing to meet kind of the different needs of different consumers. So I think all 3 as a starting place is appropriate, and just wanted to add in kind of how 2 specific sections, kind of as you alluded to, really are like interconnected with this payment method requirement. So I think it's of section 5, subsection 1F, and then 1G. So means for conducting a charging session in languages other than English, and then 1G, which is really related to facilitating charging for unbanked, underbanked, and low to moderate income. I think for facilitating charging in languages other than English, I'd be really interested in the EVSP's kind of take on this, but it's my understanding that kind of the toll-free numbers can help facilitate charging sessions in languages other than English. And so I think that would be a good starting place, but also would be interested in like how payment method signage could be used to facilitate this, or the charging providers' apps could be used to facilitate this. And I'd be interested in, if they're already doing this, or if this is something that they're looking at. And then 2, on the unbanked and underbanked component, I think, our comments reflected this, but ensuring that the 3 requirements all accept prepaid cards. It is unlikely that, these rules will result in a requirement for accepting cash, but that would be kind of the next best thing, would be a way for folks to load a predetermined amount of money onto a prepaid card and then use that prepaid card to facilitate payment. So again, all of this is reflected in our comments, and happy to answer any questions there. So thank you.
Annabelle, I did have a question for you about your comments. You spent a portion of those comments talking about a large number of people still going into the store at location if the charging station is at one, or in reference to gas, really. A large number of people buying gas will go into the store to pay for the gas, and that might be an option for electric vehicle charging as well. And I was thinking, okay, well, that could be one of the ways that we make sure that we're continuing to provide service to unbanked, underbanked, or low-income people, is allowing them to go to a facility and pay cash at it. But I'm also wondering how that works with these electric vehicle charging stations. Are they connected when they're placed at a gas station or a facility at some, wherever that facility is? Are they going to be connected to that facility so that somebody can go in and pay at the cash register for their charging station or their charging session? Is that even how they're set up, is my question, or can they be set up that way in the future if they're not already?
I think that's a great question. I think that data, which is provided by the Association for Convenience and Fuel Retailing, I think was really supposed to kind of just highlight the existing consumer behaviors. But obviously that needs to be reconciled with kind of existing charging practices. And I would definitely defer to the EVSPs here. But my understanding is that kind of having an attendant to be able to initiate a charge is really not the norm at all. But just trying to, I think the purpose of that, again, is just to demonstrate that people are still using cash to pay for fueling sessions. And we need to find kind of an in-between payment method that still kind of accommodates that preference.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I agree that it's really important, and the bill itself really put a highlight on making sure that part of the accessibility moving forward and getting people to use the electric vehicles more often is making it easy for them to do their charging. So even if that includes them not having a bank account or not having access to pay for it with a credit card or whatever. So we always need to keep that in mind, as somehow we need to incorporate that into any of the payment options that we put into places. They have to be able to be used by those who are unbanked, underbanked, or low income.
Yeah, and so part of my my comment about including interoperability, or how it ties in, and also before I get there, we will be discussing further on. We have a section for both the other languages aspect and for the not unbanked, and low to moderate income. We'll also have a comment section, but I know some of it does all tie together. But one thing I was wondering on interoperability is kind of ties in with using the prepaid credit cards as payment to be able to use a credit card reader, because from my understanding currently most prepaid cards don't have a contactless option. You have to use the mag strip or the chip reader on that, which does add extra cost on installation. But at the same time, I was looking at a lot of those prepaid credit cards and they charge a monthly fee. So you're telling people that have low income, that potentially are likely to also be the same people that are unbanked, that you need to go get another card that you have to pay a monthly fee on to be able to do this. Where if networks, if service providers were able to have, some other method where they can directly basically make that payment, be able to purchase that, and then that, even if especially through one company, and then that's tied through interoperability. So even if they don't go to that network, they could still use their payment method through that. It just seems that might be easier for industry to come up with a simple process that could, especially if we give them options to allow it to actually meet that would better serve that spectrum of people while still providing the requirement. And in the end, it might actually be better for everyone, keeping costs down. And then it's just the prepaid credit card doesn't seem like the greatest option. It seems like it's the easiest option from the outlook, but then there's other challenges with it. Corey?
Thanks, Tim. Corey Bullis on behalf of Flow here. We are an EV charging company for those who are not familiar with us. I think one thing I would just kind of throw into this discussion for everyone to consider is before we start kind of getting too focused on one certain technology over another, I feel like we kind of need to take a step back and do a landscape assessment or some research and analysis of the various options, their level of penetration. Or I see comments here in the chat about, what data do we have about EV drivers, payment preferences, things like that. I think we really need to make sure we're making this process very data driven and understanding the prevalence of each payment option, what exists, what do consumers have access to, and use that to kind of inform our decision here before we get too focused on, well, this technology is common versus this one isn't, because I think the data should really drive this conversation, and then everything else can kind of flow from that.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go to the comments real quick, and I'll go to the next people. So Cam, is there any data on there on the number of unbanked EV owners that exist? Has this been any surveys of unbanked EV owners and their payment preferences? No, not that I have seen or has been given to me on any surveys or data on that. There might be some stuff from California. It'd probably be likely a few years old at this point. And then currently, as far as us doing any studies, we are relying heavily on you guys to help provide us any type of data that you may have on this type of stuff, on your information or surveys. If you're a organization representing owners, we don't really have the funding or the staffing to run this type of stuff. Commerce may be able to help provide us with some more information too. Maybe they have. But the funding that we received to get up and going was nowhere near what was asked for, and the registrations are taking a while even to roll, and so we don't really have funding to go out and do a whole bunch of studies and spend time doing this type of research. So we need that input from you guys. And Charlie, currently gas stations can designate as a commercial only, membership only, Pacific Pride, Costco, without free access to all. Will limitations be allowed for EV charging stations? With statute, basically, if you are a manufacturer of a vehicle and you allow, and if it's designed to be charged for your vehicle, aka Tesla, the way their DC fast chargers are set up, then in that case they are exempt from interoperability standards. I think one other portion, but for the most part, if it's not a manufacturer producing a network for their vehicles that they're manufacturing, you will have to be open to everyone. And then just go back down to Michael. I agree with Corey's comment about research data analysis, but I want to emphasize the importance of the future-proofing potential of these rules, and existing data doesn't capture. And yeah, thanks for reminding me that, Michael. We have to remember, yeah, this rule is not just what the current status is. This is that, not just, I wouldn't even say future-proof, but part of it, the state pushing towards electrifying is, yesterday I actually looked up in the Olympia area on Car Gurus, there was 6 cars under $6,000 that were EV. And that market right now, there's not a ton of vehicles actually available, but it is getting to that point where there is different demographics will start coming into the vehicles. The older Leafs and some of the older, I forget what the Mitsubishi was called, but the Leafs definitely have come down in price and are getting to the point where you know, you will see a much different demographic buying. It's not just Teslas. People are like, oh, you know, they always think about the Tesla buyer, but there's definitely a lot of EVs out there that other people could be purchasing. And if you have a charging at home, I mean, it's really getting a first gen Leaf is actually not a bad financial option to get into a vehicle and not pay for gas and reduce maintenance and everything else if you're not driving very far. So I would see a lot of the stuff changing in the next few years fairly quickly. And like Michael said, the data that's out there right now is nothing to show that, because that's all data that was already pulled and then has been reviewed.
Tim, can we go to Matthew's question? He's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, going back to the.
We just took his hand down. Maybe he was done. Oh. I think Jay was next.
All right. Yep, Jay.
Sure. Okay, I had to unmute. Jay Friedland from Plug in America. So I just wanted to comment a couple of things. Tim, you are 100% correct about prepaid credit card costs. In general, that industry, as with many industries, you know, the underserved consumers are burdened with the highest set of costs. There has been some movement in that, where, and I guess one of the other things that I would mention is that this concept of sort of prepaid or cash cards, you know, universal ones, is becoming much more popular. For example, I know that now, like, Social Security disability payments are made onto a prepaid card, onto a cash card. So, and these function as credit cards. So I think that is, or, you know, EMV chip cards, et cetera. So I think that that's an important thing to note. The two other things I just wanted to mention, I actually agree with my colleague Corey on a number of things, but one of the things I think you have to, and Michael I think said it very well, you have to be very careful on the data. We don't have a lot of data on credit card, particularly on credit card readers on EVSEs, because the EVSPs and EVSE manufacturers haven't put them on. And so you can't look at consumer trends if the device isn't there. So I think that's very important to note, that a lot of the data you'll get will say, oh, everybody's using tap cards or everybody's using apps. But you know, there are, whether you're you know, you may have a smartphone that can do a tap, you know, do near field communications. You may have a credit card that can do tap again, but you may not. And so I think we need to be careful. And I think your recognition of the fact the used vehicle market is starting to really rise is very, very important. And it looks like there's a reasonable chance we are going to get a federal tax credit available for used EVs, which will further help accelerate that market. So I think that the equity space is really changing, and basically this is the democratization of electric vehicles, and it's very important. And the final thing I'll say to that is, I think, well, everyone keeps talking about future proofing, and I am like a big fan of everything from, you know, app based to, you know, to ISO 15118 where appropriate, you know, and plug and charge, and all of these different kinds of wonderful technologies that will, again, allow for a better experience, while gas stations continue to take, you know, chip cards. I think that should be the baseline. You know, there's sort of the future proofing, but there's also sort of the minimum requirement to allow the broadest kind of accessibility. And what do people, you know, as I don't know who it is, Capital One, what do you have in your wallet today? That kind of thing. I think that's what we have to really think of from a consumer perspective, to not force them through something else. And actually, finally, to answer Gloria's question about charging at gas stations, one of the solutions could easily be, at many gas stations or convenience stores, there are already kiosks of prepaid cards. You can walk up and get everything from a Outback's, steakhouse card to a Home Depot card to to an Apple card and all those kinds of things. And you could certainly have something that was a prepaid charging card that was available, so someone could walk in, pay cash, and get that, and then use it on the charger. So I think that there are solutions that can fit that without necessarily having to, because ideally, there are whole jurisdictions now, state of Massachusetts, San Francisco, Philadelphia, that are banning cashless stores because it's sort of the modern version of redlining. So I think we have to be really aware, and again, the statute directly addresses this in terms of trying to look at the equity and the open access. Thanks so much. Oh, and we filed comments to this effect as well, and we're happy to share them publicly.
All right, thank you.
Jay, I actually had a follow-up for you. Well, it's not necessarily follow-up for you directly, more for everybody. But when we're trying to assess what requirements to establish in this rule, you're suggesting that we should make card readers be standardized on all equipment. So if that is not currently how most of these charging stations are manufactured, it would be very useful for us to get information from all of you about how much that would cost you to implement these card readers on existing equipment, as well as moving forward with new equipment that you may install, how much that would cost you to add a card reader to it, to that manufacturing process for future charging stations. That kind of information helps us to determine, coming back to one of the other requirements that the statute has us looking at, which is reducing costs, but also still making sure that we're benefiting as many people as possible. So that's one of the things that we kind of have to look at. If you guys are able to provide us with some information about how those kind of costs, that would be great.
Sure. And Gloria, to answer your question just briefly, I think that the EVSPs will be happy to provide you that information. I'm guessing it was an incredibly contentious process. I think Francesca said it very, very well in California, where the numbers came in all over the place. You had EVSE only manufacturers, people not running networks, who basically said, the cost is this, which was fairly small. And then you had the ranging up to very, very expensive costs, factoring in estimated maintenance and expansion of networking contracts, which is hard because, again, that raises the cost for the consumers. The reality of the situation is there's a real hardware cost. There's also potentially maintenance costs. These are all true. But if we're trying to serve the public, and if you think about, for example, one of the things I would suggest is potentially contacting the folks at ARB, the California Air Resources Board in California. They gathered a lot of data on things. I would also reach out to, say, local municipalities in, like King County and Seattle, because they've done a bunch of work with electric parking meters. The parking meter analogy is probably closer than many of the other analogies, because those are hardened card readers that are now available so that people can walk up to a parking meter and slide their credit card in and be able to, pay for a parking session. And those, the costs that we were finally being told were, in the $50 to $100 range per unit. And the revenue availability, it increased revenue significantly. So that was just something in terms of doing that. I'll add one more thing, which is we spoke to some smaller EVSPs who have many, many more transactions on credit cards than, say, some of the larger ones do, because they put credit card readers on all of them. For example, OpConnect in Oregon. And I would suggest, potentially talking to them as well, because as you're a smaller EVSP, you're not necessarily, interoperating with the larger ones because of the interoperation, the fees and the, sort of transit and roaming costs. And so they put credit card readers on, and they get like 50% of their sessions on credit cards. So there's a lot of both anecdotal and real data out there, but you have to be very careful how you sort it out. Thanks.
Wonderful information. Thank you, Jay. And for all of you folks that are attending today, if you can provide us with whatever information you have, including, as Jay mentioned, the difference between the cost of the hardware installation itself versus any maintenance that would be required as part of it, or changes to the networks that you're having to implement and all of that. Breaking all of that out for us would be super helpful. I think Jeff Dillon was next on the questions.
Hi, good morning. Dylan Jaff on behalf of the Electric Vehicle Charging Association. I just have a comment here on the first question of whether all three should be required or allow options. So access must be balanced with other important factors to the site hosts must consider when operating EV charging stations, including cost, reliability, maintenance, and security. So ultimately, site hosts and EV charging providers know their customers and have every motivation to make payment easy and accessible. So really, payment standards should ultimately empower site hosts to choose the payment methods that best suit their unique needs as provided in SB 5192. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Francisca?
Thanks, Tim. Francesca Wall with Tesla. A lot to respond to, so I'll try to keep this fairly brief. First, I just wanted to sort of echo Corey and Michael's comments. I think data is incredibly important, but at the same time, we also need to be looking at the future. So we're happy to follow up with some of the data requests on the credit card readers and some of the other items as well. But I will just say that, it's not something that we've obviously integrated into our Tesla charging system. We integrate everything into the vehicle and the back end. So we approach this a little bit differently. And I think part of the biggest element that we try to stress here is the customer experience element. Jay brought it up, many others have brought it up, and we're fundamentally not trying to really repeat the gas station model. I think in many ways, we're trying to provide a better experience because we have many different charging use cases, right? I think we also need to think about the distinction between fast charging versus charging where you park, level 2 charging access, and what that means from a customer perspective. If you're going to be getting out of your car and leaving your vehicle for several hours versus if you're going to be, just grabbing a cup of coffee while you're filling up at a fast charger during a road trip. There's many different applications. And so customer experience hopefully should fundamentally be better even than the gas station model potentially. So I would urge us to think about the different use cases here. At the same time, I do think there was some flexibility written into the legislation in terms of trying to stress the fact there should be more than one payment option, but without actually choosing one in addition to whatever the baseline is that is developed. And so that flexibility is impactful and helpful to be able to future-proof or think about how technology may change while still trying to incorporate some of the basic principles, which I think in our mind are really redundancy, reliability, and access, along with customer experience. And so I think we just have to take a close look at what the data says, but then also think about the different types of charging use cases out there in the context of how the legislation was trying to provide access while maintaining flexibility potentially.
Right, thank you. And one thing, so I don't forget, along with the 1-800 type number, is as the inspectors go out there, if they find issues with the device, whether it's accuracy or other non-compliance, if there is a way for the inspector to get a hold of the company where you can shut it down until it's fixed, we'd probably end up putting a small sticker on it, where if we can't do that, you'll probably get plastered with a really big ugly sign saying this is out of compliance. So that's just one thing. I don't know what we'll be able to put into regulations. I'll have to talk with our council on that, but just from a standpoint, it's best if there's an easy way for our inspectors can get a hold of the service provider to shut the machine down until it's fixed. All right, moving on to Corey.
Hey there, Corey again on behalf of Flow. I just wanted to add further kind of nuance or clarification to the comments around data. I think the comments made by Michael and Jay are totally right on. We need to be looking to the future. And your comments, Tim, about future driver demographics, used vehicles, I think all of that is right on. I just want to emphasize that what I'm really trying to get at is making sure we put as much data onto the table as possible. It's not going to be a perfect process. It's probably not, it's not going to be as clear cut as we all would like it to be. I just want to make sure that through this process, I think everyone probably has their favorite statistic they like to rely on, no matter what side you're coming from on this issue. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at data as holistically as possible. We'll recognize where data just won't exist, and we'll have to deal with that as we come with it. And to the point about driver demographics changing over time, I think that's a really good one, and we get that. And I think the other piece I would just say to that is, once again, under this umbrella of looking at things holistically, we need to look to the future of driver demographics, but you also need to look to the future of consumer preferences for payment. And even if the industry doesn't have, let's say, credit cards writ large right now on their hardware, you can still look at global trends and payment trends in other industries, because it can still be informative. Not to say it's a perfect copy paste effort to apply to this situation, but I think it's still very legitimate to be looking at things writ large beyond just transportation. So just wanted to add a little bit more color or nuance, because I think what people pointed out are good points.
Thank you. Eric?
Hey, thanks, Tim. Eric Carlin with Green Lots. Appreciated the conversation thus far and been listening attentively. We, of course, EVSP, was highly involved in the California regulatory processes that many have alluded to here, and it's no secret that aspects of those got pretty contentious, and I think there's some perhaps spillover into this conversation here right now that I just want to note that perhaps might be able to be avoided. In California, the statute pertaining to payment options and multiple payment methods was far less specific than what we're looking at here. The statute we have here in Washington is pretty well defined with respect to what needs to happen. And stakeholders' perspectives can differ on the virtues of it, but it does require a credit card reader. It also allows that a contactless credit card reader can satisfy that requirement. So perhaps there's less debate and analysis that really needs to happen, since the statute itself is pretty prescriptive with respect to what needs to happen here. On the multiple payment methods aspect, a novel area that I'll note that I think we've talked less about, that goes beyond what California did, would be the means of conducting a session in a language other than English. This is something that perhaps could be more than meets the eye with respect to what it mean for industry to incorporate this. So be curious to kind of discuss that further. Conceivably this could involve software development timelines for supporting multiple languages on displays at chargers, so on and so forth. So and related to that piece, I'd be curious for Washington-based stakeholders what those requirements look like at gas stations, and if there's any sort of parallels that can be taken with respect to signage requirements at gas stations, that things need to be in other English, or that the screens that consumers interact with at gas stations need to support a language other than English, or that an attendant needs to be bilingual. I don't know, but I'm curious if this is a novel requirement that is just applicable to the EVS industry, or if there's parallels from other sort of refueling stations that we could take some guidance from. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we'll get into that more, but there is no requirements I know of at gas stations for the language requirement. All right, Matthew.
Hi, I'd like to actually go back to a point that was raised early, and this might be returning to something that everybody on the call knows, but I do want to make sure we answer the question. It was asked whether it is realistic or common in the industry for the store to accept payment. And Electrify America operates the largest network of DC fast charge, open standard DC fast charging stations in the US. And in every single case across 46 states, we lease space from the site host, and the site host does not own or operate or have any responsibility for our station. We take that on ourselves. But that means that if our station is at a Walmart or a Target or a Shell gas station or a convenience store, there's no ability at all for that site host to collect payment from our customers. Our hours of operation are different than our site hosts. Our relationship is no closer to a Walmart site host than the relationship that the freestanding McDonald's in the parking lot has. And so if there was any consideration of requiring the ability to pay for this product in the store, that would fundamentally alter the business model that is most common in the charging business. And I should note that while we are not this is a diverse industry, we are by no means the only player in the industry that follows the owner-operator model. It would be a extraordinarily transformative requirement to require that. It would fundamentally change how service is provided in the state, well beyond, I think, the intent of the legislature. Second, there's a question here about whether interoperability is an option. Interoperability, if you're considering it as a payment option as opposed to a requirement, I understand the question. But if you're considering to require interoperability, I want to flag that interoperability does require commercial relationships to be established between parties, and the terms of those are subject to ongoing and very complicated commercial relationships. And I don't think that it would be wise for the state to attempt to mandate contractual relationships between independent third parties. That could be very, very disruptive and is kind of unrealistic to mandate a commercial relationship between two private firms. And I should note that if you do choose to require the credit card payment, then the goal of interoperability in that case is addressed, because you have created a payment option without having somebody to be required to join multiple networks. And so it's kind of a belts and suspenders situation. If the question is whether that should be an option as an alternative to credit cards, then that we would have no opposition to that. But we want to make sure that there isn't an attempt by Washington to require interoperability instead of credit cards. Third point is that we operate plug and charge under the ISO 15118 standard across multiple automakers, which is a payment method that allows somebody to drive their vehicle up to our station, simply plug in, and the charge initiates. And there is no need to pull out anything from your wallet or pull out a fob or anything else. It initiates automatically under an international standard of the ISO 15118 standard. And so we think that if there are going to be considerations of alternative payment options, that is a rapidly growing option. Many automakers are racing to implement that. We already have 3 automakers deploying that capability and many more coming. And so actually we have 4 with many more coming. And so we think that that should be a payment option. And finally, just a note, there seems to be a lot of questions about data availability and how often this transactions are done with credit cards, et cetera. We report in our annual report the percentage of total transactions that are with credit cards and trends over time. And the trends are downward, but that data is fully available and public and on our website. So if anybody wants it, I'd be happy to send it to you. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you. And just a quick note on interoperability, there is in section 6, which we're meeting on in 2 weeks, we are required to adopt interoperability standards. They have to be non-proprietary interoperability standards, so that should basically relieve some of the fees and whatnot on that, but that'll be discussed. And when I was talking about interoperability, it's more of just if there's a way to be expanded on within that interoperability standard, that's then it'd be required. Just kind of another option that I was throwing out there if that was a possibility to increase the use of payment methods.
Yeah, there's an important distinction I was trying to make on that between the interoperability standard, which is the technical capability, and the actual using interoperability for payment, which requires the only way that occurs is 2 networks need to have a commercial relationship where money transfers from one to the other. They have to have agreements on what the pricing is and how that money will transfer using the standard. But it is a step further, and I wanted to emphasize that requiring such a step would be quite unprecedented. California evaluated it and concluded they didn't have legal authority to do so. So that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be more. I was thinking more of as an extra option to give industry flexibility on how they want to attack the requirement. And moving on to Jay.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tim, did you call me?
Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Hi, this is Jay Friedland again, Plug in America. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands, while the statute is pretty clear, and again, I think Eric put this incredibly well, which is the statute in California was unclear in several particular areas, and you can blame me for that, everybody in the entire industry. But I think what we kind of got to was, there were some issues around mays and shalls. And, this is always the challenge with putting together policy and implementing it in law. The Washington state law is much, much clearer. But there is still an area of conflict in it, which is that it talks about this idea that contact card reader devices may be used as an option to meet this subsection, but then further down, when you talk about means of facilitating charging sessions for consumers that are unbanked, underbanked, or low and moderate income, accepting prepaid cards through a card reader device. And so the conflict there is that there are currently not tap-based prepaid cards. The banking industry has said that they're going to do these, but typically the lag has been, anywhere between 5 and 10 years. I mean, we didn't even get chip prepaid cards for, in any kind of, consumer availability, until the late, I'd say it was like 2018 or 2019 when we started to see those. And so this is a really big issue in terms of contention. I think, by the way, there are some pretty clever ways you could get around this. I mean, if the industry again, combined together to make a prepaid card, like a prepaid charging card, and put it in every kiosk possible. And Plug America has actually suggested this to the industry as a lower cost solution potentially than putting credit card readers on. But again, I will circle back to while we would love the experience to be a better experience for new consumers of electric vehicles, particularly used ones, that similarity of experience, so that they're not going through something different, or they pull up at an electric vehicle refueling station and they can't get access. That basically is just not acceptable. So I think that that's really where we need to focus how this may be. So again, I would point out that that statute is in conflict, and it'll be the rulemaking that will have to determine how that works.
All right, thank you. Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. My main point is I'll agree with Francesca. There's a lot here, so I'll try and be brief and hit on some of the highlights. So I do think ChargePoint agrees with the clear direction in the legislation to allow contactless card reader devices to be used if a credit card reader device option is required. We think that that's future proofing. We think that's where the industry is clearly going. We also think it addresses a lot of reliability concerns. And that is somewhat related to the comments from Matt, in that, a large portion of the business models, in particular for DC fast charging, is to have, owns and operates that EVSE equipment to lease land on property is somebody else's. And making sure that EVSE operators can choose the most reliable means of payment method there is critical. It circles back to the idea of, in here somewhere about, essentially making sure that all this works on a regular basis. If we put into rules conflicts between, what we can choose as the most reliable option and the desire, I think, of all of us to have the most reliable equipment out there, that really puts industry in a difficult spot. So just circling back to, I think, Tim, you noted optionality here, and we really agree with that, giving the EVSE providers the option to meet this requirement in a number of different ways. I'll say real quickly that the toll-free number on each EVSE kiosk. I will say, to Eric's point, different EVSE providers are going to have maybe different options when it comes to a toll-free number, in particular multilingual toll-free numbers. And just to put it in perspective, anytime you add a new language, that's not just one employee you have to hire. You've got to hire at least 3 shifts a day over the year-long period, in order to have 24/7 customer availability. If you're doing that in-house, there are some connection options that you can use third parties with toll-free numbers to offer multilingual access. And then just finally, I do want to, somewhat connect to my second point, is I think we do need to not get too stuck into the gas station model. Gas stations are developed because inherently they are a combustible fuel that needs to be managed and managed in a safe and secure way. EVSE is very different, and we've got charging that takes place at home, at workplaces, 24/7, 365 are the requirements of many grant programs, and requirements that a lot of EVSE drivers like, being able to charge at any time of the day. And so I would just encourage us not to go back to that gas station model as our reference point, but rather think of electric vehicle charging as an ecosystem
an ecosystem that needs to function and deliver a variety of products to EV drivers at all times. Thanks.
Thank you. Melania.
Hi, this is Noelani again with Tesla. I wanted to first echo the comments made by Electrify America and ChargePoint on the DC fast charging development model, and that it is a departure from the gas station model. I think that's an important point to make. So I won't add any additional comments on that, but I did want to turn to the actual legislation. So Section 5, reading it, it does require that EV service providers make available multiple payment methods. And then it outlines that those payment methods may include, but are not limited to, a variety of different options, including a toll-free number, a mobile payment option, a credit card reader. So I wanted to just underscore that may component, that it built in some flexibility into the bill, which I think is important. So credit card readers and contactless credit card readers are potential payment methods that EV charging stations could provide, but this bill does not mandate it. If you read the outline of the bill, I also wanted to underscore that mobile payment options are increasingly common as more people adopt smartphones and mobile payment technology. And we're seeing some charging providers that are already integrating auto charge or plug-in charge into their networks, whereby the customer's electric vehicle is automatically recognized and that the charging process begins without need to open an application or use a credit card. This is similar to what my colleague Francesca flagged earlier, how Tesla drivers today can access payment for Tesla supercharging integrated in the vehicle. And then lastly, while some level of standardization may be needed and payment options for EV charging stations to improve customer experience and to make sure that we're facilitating ease of charging access, it should not lock the market or customers into one particular technology or set of technologies. So definitely want to align with the legislation and build in that flexibility to support EV drivers in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Annabelle?
Thanks. This has been a really great discussion. And, I think that the flexibility in the bill is really important. Obviously, this space is rapidly changing. And, one of my organization's main concern is just that we are indeed kind of meeting the requirements of subsection 1G. So making sure that there is, full access for unbanked, underbanked, or low to moderate income. Technology is changing, but we need to make sure that whatever, multiple minimum payment methods are chosen, that they facilitate access for those consumers and without unduly burdening them by relegating them to just one specific kind of longer and more difficult payment option. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of that again, and certainly don't want to lose sight of that. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Check. Okay, Eric had a comment about interoperability, but that'll be covered next meeting. Cam just reading some of the comments, Cam recommended that the department not create rules that conflict with the statute in Section 5. Section requires multiple payment options from one of the 3 listed categories, or the 4th category, other, imply the statement payment methods may include but not limited to. All right. Michael, do you still have a...
Yeah, I do. This is Michael Breach with Department of Commerce. I just want to echo Annabelle and say that, ag team, you guys are doing a really good job. Thank you. You're getting an inundation of information and opinions here. So just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing, both visibly and invisibly. The second part I wanted to state was, in observing this most recent conversation around payment options, I'm struck by a lot of the focus on the means, and we're not so much the desired outcomes. Nolani mentioned, for example, flexibility, though, which is a value or a potential outcome. Annabelle just read from the legislation that's 1G that says around underbanked and unbanked. And I'm wondering, and just food for thought, is that it might be constructive for us to think about desired outcomes and parameters around that, and maybe you could even say like values from the private sector. The state has a number of competing, or they're mostly complementary, but one could argue they might be competing outcomes based on our greenhouse gas reduction targets, what's going to be happening with the LCFS and the cap and invest, and potentially other vehicle mandates to come, and aligning, surveying those outcomes and then determining which means achieve all of those, most of those, while also recognizing that there are going to be trade-offs. So I just feel like we're getting stuck in the contactless payment versus the phone call, and I'm stepping back, and others like Corey have suggested we do step back in some ways, and I want to echo that and say, what are our intended outcomes here, and we across all stakeholders, and then from there, and identifying maybe the ones that rise to the top in terms of frequency or recognition that there's legal mandates to them in this bill or others. And what means achieve those. And so Ag Team, I think that I know we talked about that previously, and I would be happy to discuss that with you further if folks on the phone are interested in proceeding with a guided conversation around that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I'll make a comment, then we'll move on to the other languages and facilitating for the unbanked and low to moderate income. But that comment kind of leads into that. So one thing is we definitely, it will be a requirement to meet Section G. But in doing that, I think we also got to remember not to lock in payment methods based off of Section G. And that if, just for an example, if we're going to use credit card payments, now you're determining the technology to meet that section. Or if there's another method out there, if you leave that open, so if currently the only way to meet that is to use a credit card, then service providers will have to put those on their equipment. But if there's another means, maybe that other means, and that may come in the future, by leaving it more open and just making that a requirement, as those means become available, they can switch away from that and better serve everyone, both as, having lower operating costs, but also providing a better service for the group covered under Section G. So I think we got to make sure that we're not pigeonholing one section trying to fix another section when there may be completely different options out there. So with that, if we can go to the next slide. All right. So other languages, the requirement is means for conducting a charging session and languages other than English. So heard from a few different people on this. We have the availability of other languages. It sounds like some service providers already have a toll-free number of, some of them are using a service. It sounds like some of them may actually have people on staff. There's also had it recommended to use mobile app, and then also potentially have some signage displays. And then, so in that, we also have what's the what are the required languages that are going to be needed to be signed? Do we have specific requirements on like the number of languages, a list of languages? And then what's the minimum content required to be covered by those languages? The other recommendation also received is maybe if there's like some type of universal language, especially if it's on signage for the device to be able to use, that if we have some symbols that are standard throughout the industry, that you could almost at least rely somewhat on those so you don't need some of the other requirements that people would know what each of those symbols means and could facilitate that. So a lot of it is we kind of need input on what should be required, what's to be able to meet this standard, and those are just some of the options. And this is the only slide with those kind of those questions and comments because it is a shorter part. Do you have any comments or questions on this?
Tim, we could always just leave it as an open-ended question that people can submit to us later in email or something if they come up with some
Sounds good.
comments.
All right, go on to the next slide then. Hold on, I got some comments coming through. Annabelle said it'd be interesting to hear more from the service providers about this. And then Victor from Seattle City Lights has been requested by a user to include telecommunication options for those with hearing impairments. Justin, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to acknowledge, you know, Annabelle's comment. I did comment a little bit earlier. I do think that, you know, it's important as just with, you know, hardware and software changes on the payment methods. I just do want to emphasize that there are costs associated with these other aspects. I think maybe they can sometimes seem a little bit simpler, but when you're again talking about, you know, having to staff something 24/7 or have a call center, have some sort of integration with an offsite translator, those are real ongoing cost. And the same thing with a mobile app. You know, I think you know, the apps can do a pretty good, you know, job of this potentially. However, you know, it's there's a lot going on in those apps, and so that the translations, you know, just have to be carefully considered and applied. And then, you know, on signage and display, I do think, you know, those things are more static, and sometimes the static nature of that can cause some challenges as well. If you, for whatever reason, need to change your mobile app or, you know, your processes change to meet requirements potentially, but then your signage doesn't match up, there can be a little bit of a mismatch there. So I think, you know, I think it's a complex topic. I think it's one that you know, the industry is aware, right, that, you know, many of the charging companies operate in, you know, in multiple countries or multiple continents, and are trying as quickly as possible to have those sorts of integrations. But again, just to, you know, maybe reiterate, these are costly items for the charging providers to implement as well.
Just checking this. Okay, seeing no more hands up or comments, we can go to the next slide. So facilitating charging sessions. So means for facilitating charging sessions for the consumers who are unbanked, underbanked, or low to moderate income, such as accepting prepaid credit cards through a card reader device. Methods established in may be used to meet this requirement if they adequately facilitate charging sessions for these consumers. And just for reference, 1E is a credit card reader device physically located on or in either the unit or the kiosk. Contactless credit card reader device may be used as an option to meet the requirements of this subsection. So just kind of going back to what I was saying earlier is not that we would not allow it, but if we did go with more of an options-based type system, just because you're not required to necessarily use a credit card reader, wouldn't mean that you may not still be required to have one to meet this section, but then there may also be other methods of meeting this. So if we go to the next slide, it has like more questions. All right, so use of prepaid cards, requirements needed to make this rule usable, and use of RFDI or other methods, how do customers obtain and pay. Basically, if there's other, I've had some service providers mention about having, they provide, they'd provide cards that reduce prices or have other methods to kind of already meet this requirement for those that fall in this category to facilitate their use of the charging sessions. So just any comments on this? We'll start off with Annabelle.
Thanks, Tim. I did actually have a question for kind of staff and agencies working on this. So you mentioned, maybe there's a pathway in which, there are multiple options for compliance with subsection 1G. I guess I'd just be curious, like, from your experience with enforcement, like, does that complicate things? What would that look like? How do you make sure that, your agency is able to enforce kind of those requirements if there were an option approach?
Well, seeing that we've never enforced anything similar to this, I don't know how that would work. And it's not saying that there is another option. It was just more brainstorming and trying to get the conversation and open it up so we're not relying on technology, but more the outcome. But it would definitely have to have input to be able to put something like this into place. And that's one thing that doing enforcement is I would definitely be considered when I work on the rules, is making sure it is something that is enforceable and it's not unenforceable per se. So it's not a good answer for you, but it is what it is at this point. This is a lot of new ground for us.
No, that is helpful. I appreciate that.
Cam?
Thanks, Timothy. I have one question and, well, actually I have two questions. The first one is, does the department have research or information sufficient to address the requirements in 1G? And does the department understand the severity of the problem, the number of unbanked or underbanked, low, moderate income, and how different payment methods can be acceptable to these populations? And what available payment methods are currently available that can be used to address this issue, and what the effect of addressing it in each particular way. I'm looking for more information to get educated on the subject. So if the department has any information that they can share, I think it would be very helpful for us engaged in this rulemaking. And then my second question is, I may have misheard, but I believe that Michael Breach made a verbal suggestion to lead a discussion on aligning this rulemaking with other legislative values. I'm just curious if the department decides to take Michael up on this, would that be a part of this process or would that be outside of this process?
So far as having any information on it or having a department within Department of Ag, the answer is no. We don't really have much of anything on this. As I kind of mentioned before, we're basically working on it is Amy, me, and Gloria Ann, with some other support here and there, depending on what it is. But far as actual going technical or having input, that doesn't really exist. So that's why we need the input from the stakeholders to provide this information. And then far as working with Commerce and looking at the other bills that are going, yeah, that's something that we'd be open to do. We definitely need their help. I don't have a whole lot of bandwidth to be able to go into that and try to figure it out myself, but conversations with them may lead somewhere. And if that does, then yeah, it would be brought to the stakeholder group, at least to some extent, to make sure that's folded in with you guys and get your guys' input on this. But it's a lot of it is it's new for us, and it's, as you know, I mean, it's just California that's made the rules and kind of learning from any of their mistakes and kind of go from there on this. Was there anything else I missed? You had a handful of questions.
I think that addressed it. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Michael, you have a comment?
Yeah, Michael Breach with Commerce. One, you know, the legislation states that Commerce and the UTC, essentially, you know, we have to show up and help out in this this rulemaking, and so my offer wasn't to in any way take leadership or authority away from ag. It's just something to consider, and so I want to make sure that folks in the conversation know, like, ag's definitely leading here, and we're just here to help out in any way we can. One of the reasons I did make that comment, though, is, for example, we are Commerce is helping implement HB 1287, which has a major need for a reliable and robust source of data for charging stations installed. And so later on in this rulemaking, there is something about data reporting to NREL. And so ag's not listed in 1287, but it's the fates of those two bills are intimately tied. So I think it would behoove us, and then of course what's happening with potential anything that may come from the LCFS rulemaking, for example, but that it's that's more about the expenditure side, but that's a very premature conversation to have right now, given that rulemaking is just about to start. But that's something ag folks, I'm happy to like help support, given the perspective that I have across all of those. And I think it would really behoove this conversation for stakeholders here to see, have greater visibility into all of that. So anyway, we can talk about that later.
Yeah, the other thing you have to remember too, if we are crossing over with some other incentives and whatnot going on, is we do have the scope of the statute that we do have to stay within too. So if it's outside that scope, and then we really don't have authority to do outside that. But that's not saying that we can't make sure that it's not working against other bills. Nothing's worse than having two regulations or statutes or rules that contradict each other. Justin?
Hey, Tim, again, just I think being responsive to the questions that you're asking here, I can talk a little bit, at least from ChargePoint's perspective, and not to say that that's any other EVSE's method or model. You know, I think on the RFID, the two primary ways we see people paying are RFID card or through the app. So the app is pretty basic, you know, the two primary means of getting apps on smartphones in the US, the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. those apps are free to download. And in fact, at least on charge points, you can get on and kind of play around with it before, signing up to create an account. So that's not a membership, it's an account with ChargePoint. On the RFID card side, we have a link on our website. I think it's in the for drivers section, and you go on and you request a free RFID card, and it shows up in the mail with an account created and how to access that online. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Again, it's a free download of that app and a free RFID card, and you're just loading in your payment method in order to process the charging stations in those two options.
Not seeing anything else. There's one thing I did forget to ask about during the payment section. So what about the difference between having an app versus non-app for mobile payment? This is kind of some input, I think, from the service providers I need. One thing I thought, because I know it is kind of annoying when you go to have to do something, you show up somewhere and they have a barcode reader, you can scan it, but then you have to download an app to actually use it, and trying to make it more consumer friendly. Is there a way to be able to not require an app? Not saying that you couldn't have an app that a customer could use, but not require an app to actually access it, so you can use your mobile device and basically through a web browser be able to access and start the charging session. Would that cause issues? Is that what's your guys' stance on that?
So, Michael, again, I don't want to pretend to talk for others, but I would say on ChargePoint session, you can also use Apple Pay and Google Pay, right? And that is a means of using your smartphone without using the ChargePoint app. I do think it's important to just kind of come back to this idea of EV charging being different than the gas station model. And while we're going to continue to have DC fast charging, and the speed at which that takes place may continue to increase, I think two things are important. One, even on DC fast charging, it's generally going to be a timeline that is longer than a gas station, 15, 20 kind of minutes. And so when you use an app-based payment or one of the EVSE providers apps, you can kind of monitor that charging session and see what's going on. So you can go get that hamburger, or you can go, run to the restroom and monitor that. So I think there are benefits that a lot of consumers see and realize from using the apps. And perhaps that's even more, it's also noticeable on the level 2 side, where somebody might be parked at a workplace for 4, 5, 6 hours. And be able to monitor a lower rate of charge over that period of time. Collect information, have all the data about your charging sessions as far as how much fuel you're intaking, how much you've paid for that, those sorts of things all in one place for the consumer to use. And so I'd just be remiss if, we're talking about payment and initiating the charging sessions, but there are many reasons that and even more, right? When we get into the energy space, load management, demand response activities, scheduling charging to take advantage of, home energy rates. There are a lot of reasons we put so much effort into the apps as ChargePoint, but I assume other EV charging providers as well, because again, it is that comprehensive ecosystem of charging experiences, and we can leverage it across those different types of charging to give the customer so much more information and a usable, customer-friendly experience.
Jay?
Hi, yes. I mean, not to be, again, Plug in America is really, we are the voice of the drivers. And So one of the things, I mean, we've heard a lot about future proofing. We've heard a lot about great features. These are all wonderful things. And in fact, one of the things I think we would argue for is an all of the above approach. In other words, it would be great if every charger had every kind of technology on it. That would be nirvana. I mean, you could go up to it. You could go up to it with your phone. You could go up to it with your Apple Watch if you can afford one. You could go up to it with, your car, which is a stored value, and use plug-in charge. You could do, all these different kinds of things. But I think when we come back to it, maybe the important thing about that all of the above approach, because EV charging can be better than the gasoline, the gas station experience. But what we go back to is consumers. And what do consumers want? Consumers want to put fuel into their vehicles. In an ideal world, and actually in the world that we live in, somewhere around 85% of all consumers charge either at home or at work. So what we're talking about now is the 15% of the experience where someone is charging in public. And if, particularly because so much of the public infrastructure, probably modulo Tesla, has been supported with public funding, this is really about a public good and also about serving the widest possible audience of people. And if that's true, then we think that you've got to set, sort of a minimum common denominator, and it's got to be the closer you can. I mean, if we want mass EV adoption, which I think everyone on this call wants, I mean, that's what we're trying to go for. We're trying to transform our transportation system and allow people to use, electric, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, motorcycles, whatever you want to use in terms of changing transportation, then it has to just be open and accessible. So it is great to, I like to joke with a friend of mine who's another software engineer. I'm a software engineer by training, which is the reason why many software developers put little watches and little things that go around, little bars that go around on their software is because the activity was taking too long. We should be able to charge faster as well. And so then you don't need to worry, you can basically charge faster and you don't have to worry about how many minutes it's going to take you to charge. All of that said, I think it really comes back to what do the consumers expect, what do they need, and how do we provide them the widest possible access. So, and again, happy to have more of a conversation both online and offline. And I have had many conversations with many of the other folks on this call, and maybe can help avoid some of the minefield that we went through in California and in other places that we're looking at this. So thanks.
All right, I'm gonna read a comment real quick and address that, and then get back to you, Matt. Comment from Charlie: as a consumer, being forced to have an app or login into a service when I'm rushed is not appreciated. Simple POS CC should be an option. Apps and other methods should be optional. And that's kind of what I was kind of getting at with the question about the app versus a web-based kind of pay is not that an app has a lot of the extra features that Justin had mentioned, but to have a simple, so you roll up, you don't have a membership anywhere, and you just want to get a card, especially you figure people that maybe just commute and normally charge at home, but then to reduce the range anxiety, they know they could just roll up to any charger, and there'll be a couple different options, and one of those options may be basically you can log onto the website and quickly just initiate the charge. Yeah, you may not get a whole bunch of other information that you get from the app, but at least it allows you to charge and get moving on your way. So that's why I was kind of wondering if that's a possibility, as just one of kind of, if we did, instead of having a small set of required options that you have to have, or not options, but a small set of requirements, if it was more broad, then you'd have to have, a few different options available, that if that was one of them. So with that, I'm going to go back to Matt, if you can go ahead and go.
So the statute refers to a mobile payment option, and I would I would just provide a couple comments on this. The first is we don't have initiate a charge via the website on our page, and I've not encountered, we focus a lot on customer feedback, and we have not seen that to be a barrier. People are on their smartphones, and if they're going to initiate a charge using a phone, they're going to use an app, not a mobile web page in our experience. The second thing just to note is that you asked the question in the context of the EVS, the EV charging company app, but there are multiple other apps that often can initiate a charge on a charging station. And most notably, the OEMs often have apps with that capability. So for instance, on our charging stations, Audi and Ford and others have an app of their own, which allows the initiation of charging and payment. And so it's important to, and in some cases, those are initiating charges that are built into the vehicle itself, so it doesn't require payment, but there are ways to initiate charging that are not the app of the charging company. Finally, I raised it before, but I'll reiterate it. Plug and charge is a mobile payment option built into the car, and the charging system does not require an app, does not require a third party or credit card or anything else to initiate. Is a mobile payment option built into the charger in the car based on the ISO 15118 standard.
All right, thank you. And just to let you know, from my standpoint as a regulator, whenever something is required that you're relying on a third party to provide, it always causes issues for us. So if you're relying on a third party app for you to meet the requirement, if that third party changes, holding you responsible, it makes it a mess. So in general, just as a regulator, I get a little worried if requirements are being met relying on third-party systems, unless if they're extremely well established, such as like a credit card system, because that's somewhat well established. It's out there. There's multiple companies providing it, and it's fairly broad. But if you're saying we're using, manufacturer apps or anything like that, it does to some extent for meeting regulatory requirements. I do get a little concerned on that, because if that company goes away for whatever reason, or if they change how they're operating, then it messes everything up, and then now you're left not in compliance out of not your fault.
I appreciate that. I mean, of course, Electrify America operates its own app, and you can pay using our app, but the universe of where this industry is going is the integration of the vehicle into payment methods is expected. So a regulation that's future-proofed is probably going to want to incorporate the role of the vehicle, or at least acknowledge its presence. And what I was just trying to communicate that the apps used to initiate charging, or the mobile payment options that are used to initiate charging, stretch quite beyond already in current practice, stretch beyond the charging company app, and are expected to continue in that direction. ISO 15118 is an international standard. It's continuing to be developed and focused on. I don't think it's going away. And you made the point that the credit card payment option is dependent on a third-party payment provider, just the same way as a third-party app is. So I think in either situation there are third parties involved, and we as a charging company, have to establish those payment options continue through contractual relationship.
Okay. Annabelle?
Thanks. Again, this is Annabelle Drayton with the Northwest Energy Coalition. I think just wanted to respond a little bit to some of that, and that as a reminder that these are minimum payment standards that AG is adopting. And my understanding of the bill is that nothing in these requirements will prohibit additional payment options. So, the charging providers are free to kind of adopt some of those new technologies as it works within their business model, and as some of their consumers want to see those. We're just talking about a suite of minimum payment options. So just wanted to provide that reminder.
All right. Looking like there's no other comments. Go ahead, go to the next slide. All right, so this is rules aren't required, but just wanted to make sure that this was out there. So as a reminder for those of you that have already read it, or if you haven't realized it. So the EV service providers may not require a subscription, membership, or account or minimum balance on an account in order to initiate a charging session at a electric vehicle service equipment subject to this section. So just wanted to make sure that was out there so everyone remembered that. And that is a little bit new requirement that will be going into effect that I know will affect some people. All right, next slide. All right, off the topic of section 5, I just wanted to bring this up. So registering devices, I've heard a little bit of concern about the registration process. What I'd like you guys to try to do is go through Department of Licensing website and register your devices that require to be registered. So if you're charging a customer to charge their vehicle, if they have to pay for the charge, then it's a commercial device and it should be registered per law, per the statute. So if you can go through and try that process, and if you run into whatever the issues are that you run into that, let us know. We like to address your actual issues that you're having and not issues that you perceive that you will have in the process. And then if there are issues, then we'll address those at that time. And if you need some help, send me an email. Department of Licensing sent me kind of a screenshot list of going through the process. So you can send that to whatever department takes care of that for your company, and you can kind of, at least it's a guide to help you walk you through that process and hopefully understand what you should be doing. All right, next slide. All right, Amy, back to you.
All right. Well, we're just wrapping up here today. So just kind of a reminder, we have 2 more upcoming meetings. One is on September 22nd, and that's going to be on non-proprietary interoperability standards. And then we're going to have another meeting on September 29th, and that's going to be related to fees and reporting. So for both of those meetings, we're going to sort of beforehand send out another request for input. So we'll have sort of like some questions and like prompts. So hopefully you guys will be able to provide us some great feedback on each of those topics. And then additionally, if you have any questions or you want to view any of these meeting recordings, you can visit our website. All of that information is on there. We update it fairly regularly. And next slide. I think that might be everything. Yeah, since we're running over our meeting time, I guess we'll just kind of wrap up. Next slide. Yeah, so if you have any additional comments or feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us. Tim's email address is up there on the screen. You can also reach out to me. I'm usually the one that sends out some of the stakeholder messages. So either way, but yeah, we really appreciate all of you joining us today and this great discussion that we had. Yeah, and thank you. I think that's the last slide.
Amy, there was a question from Nolani asking when we would like comments submitted for the next meeting.
I'm not sure yet. I believe the next meeting is, we have a little bit of time, probably a day or two before the actual meeting. That way we'll kind of have some time to add that content into the presentation. But I can give you a more specific date kind of as we get a little closer to the time.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I'd say like the Monday prior to the meetings are on Wednesdays. That just gives us a little bit of time to go through them and incorporate it. And also if we need to look up something, we have that time.
Yeah, and if you're not able to submit the comment before the meeting itself, we'll still take all of that information into account throughout this rulemaking process. And you can always raise those comments during the meetings as well.
Yeah, and if you are running late, I mean, I did get a handful of comments yesterday, and I think even late into the night yesterday. We do try to read through those, just no guarantees.
Yeah, it gives us a good idea of what you guys want us to cover and some of the discussion points that we should raise during the meeting. So it's very helpful. But I think that's everything. So thank you guys so much. We really appreciate all your input.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.